This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hi everyone, it's Rebecca, and Tara and I are really excited to have author Michael Blouin with us today. He is a two-time recipient of the ReLit Award for Best Novel in Canada. His fifth book, 2019's Skin House, will land on the moon with NASA later this year and with SpaceX in 2023. His new novel, I Am Billy the Kid, has been named most anticipated by Quill and Quire and launches in just a few weeks. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you guys. I'm very much a fan of the show.
Well, thank you so much.
you.
And we just want to mention that Mike has a 10-week-old puppy, Billy, who may be making a little bit of noise in the background, but Tara and I are dog lovers and we have our own, and so we're all good with that. Okay.
Billy's been so anxious to be part of a podcast.
So we're just going to start right off, since we said Billy, the name Billy already. We're just going to start out and ask you, can you please tell us a bit about your new book, I Am Billy the Kid?
Okay, well, Billy the Kid is, or I Am Billy the Kid is, it's a revisionist Western. But I would describe it more, it's an historical novel written from a modern sensibility. It's unlike any other novel that I've written, although I'd have to say that most of the novels that I've written are unlike any of the other novels that I've written. And it takes a look at the historical Billy the Kid, who was killed on July 14th, 1881, at 21 years old by Pat Garrett. But it imagines that the truth of the story is that Billy faked his own death in order to escape his own notoriety and the fact that people were continuously trying to kill him. And it follows his life past that and well into his 40s and 50s and his eventual escape into Canada with his brother. So that's kind of the plot summary, but the more important aspect is who he meets along the way. Most importantly, a young woman by the name of Turner Wing, who is it's equally her story, this novel, and she actually becomes the hero of the piece, I would say.
Okay, so Mike, I can't remember a time when I didn't know of Billy the Kid. Like, it's just one of those, it's ingrained. I find I'm 50, so maybe it's not so much now, but in my age group, it is. When did you first become interested in the story or the legend of Billy the Kid?
Well, I guess I really became initially interested when I started writing this novel. I was always aware of Billy the Kid as a Western myth and as a Western trope, and I've always been interested in the Western since I was very, very too young really to understand what the Western trope was really all about. But I guess my awareness of him as a literary figure began when kind of coincided with me wanting to become a writer in my early 20s. And I read a book called The Complete Works of Billy the Kid by Michael Ondaatje. And I also became aware of a book called The True Eventual Story of Billy the Kid by bpNichol. And both of these writers were instrumental in me wanting to be a writer, but also realizing that it was possible to become the kind of writer that I wanted to become in this country. They had both blazed a trail that I was very anxious to follow. And they had both written about Billy the Kid, but that was incidental to me at the time. And it wasn't until many years later, in fact, probably about 10 years ago now, that I was taking a shower in the morning in the house that I'm sitting in now, and not thinking about writing particularly, just having a shower, and the phrase "I am Billy the Kid" popped into my head. And when it did, I thought, well, that's a novel. I have no idea what it's about or what it's going to be, but I realized that's a novel. And 10 years later, here we are.
Wow, that's kind of cool. What or who was your inspiration for Turner Wing? Because I love her. she's a great character.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of her as well, which I hope comes through in the book. I guess the inspiration for Turner Wing is every courageous young woman that I've ever met, which is all of them really. Um, I was as I was writing this book, the 10-year process that it took. I was the head of a high school drama department for many of those years, and so I was privileged to be involved with young women about 17 years old because they were in grade 12, who year after year they were the ones writing, directing, producing, acting, and singing in these stage productions that we do each year. And so I would say that that's a big part of the inspiration of me kind of wanting to recognize young women for uh, the challenges they face and the things that they do. There's a quote in the book. Women are, and this is Billy the Kid speaking. Women are generally better than men, and all men know this. They just react to it different.
Mhm.
And I think that says an awful lot about the version of Billy that I decided to create, but also about Turner. I can't seem to write a novel without a very strong female lead. I haven't done so yet, and I can't. The book that I'm writing now has got one as well. So it's just yeah, Turner Wing is I would say she's the hero of the story, and in a sense, Billy is there as a framework for her to exist.
Can I jump in and just, Tara, if it's okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to know, so when you had this title in your head, which is just amazing, I just love how authors come up with their ideas. Do you sit down and then make an outline, or how in the world did you start to navigate this idea that, okay, I've got a title, but now I'm going to put a story together? So how can you talk a little bit about how that functions?
I sure can. I've never made an outline in my life. Um, the books always surprise me. So in the same way that the title surprised me, everything else about it surprised me as well. And I know I said that I knew it was a novel right away, and the truth is I knew it was a book right away. And I thought it was a book of experimental poetry, very much like bpNichol's book was. And I thought, well, I can play with that concept, and I started writing it that way as a book of poetry. And Billy and his brother Joseph, because they start the story, they were the first characters to arrive. And as I was writing this, we'll call it poetry, but it was really more narrative. As I was writing that, these two characters made it very clear to me that, buddy, we are not involved in your book of experimental poetry, my friend. This is a 420-page novel, and you're along for the ride. And just do what we say, and you'll be fine, bud. So that's pretty much how that developed. That process. None of the books that I've ever written have ever followed an outline, and I know people have great success doing that, putting up wall charts and sticky notes and all of that. But I really am, as I said, I'm always along for the ride, and it's always the characters who tell me what's going to happen, and I'm just furiously trying to scribble down what they tell me to do.
Oh, thank you. I love hearing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and having heard that, I can see a poetic background to the story, even though it's a narrative, just
Mm-hmm.
in the way your words flow at times, and
Well,
even
thank
some
you
of,
for that.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I'm a poet as well. I guess I say I guess because I think of what I do in terms of fiction as being innovative and kind of on the cutting edge of what's possible. I like to flatter myself at night, anyway, late at night to think that way. But I also write poetry and publish books of poetry, but I don't think of my poetry in that quite that same way. I kind of think of myself as someone who writes poetry, and I try not to get in the way of people who are doing really, really, really interesting things. And particularly in Canada right now, there's a lot of people doing that type of thing. But yeah, I think of myself as a novelist who allows kind of the poetic soul to leak through the words now and then.
Okay, so Mike, one of the first things I noticed, I would say by page 2, is that storytelling was like a prominent theme when I was reading it. Like even on the first page ends with the sentence, "But this is Turner's story now. Speak Turner." And then you have a couple pages or a page later, "But let him tell it now. Speak Billy." So
Mm-hmm.
I really love this focus on storytelling. And I found that there was also a distinction was made as I'm reading between the story that is known by others and how they tell it. So almost like as a myth or a legend, versus the story that is told by the characters themselves. Can you discuss this duality and if and how it affected your writing process?
Well, that's our lives, isn't it? Our lives are narratives. We create our own story as we go, and it's not necessarily. In fact, it's very seldom, if ever, the same story that others perceive as we go about our business. There's a line in my previous novel, Skin House, the one that's going to the moon, um, where the female lead speaks about the male lead, and the male lead is not particularly somebody you would want to have as a character reference if you were applying for a job. And she says about him, "I know he makes himself the main character in every story that he tells." And that's true of that character, but I think it's also true of all of us, or I certainly know it's true of me. And I'm sure people that I know would say the same thing, is that we think of ourselves as the star of the movie that we're in, and we're just not. This is an enormous movie with a cast of very many people, and we're at best someone who might get noticed in the background. So I guess the way I look at it is every human life is a narrative. Every human life is a story. But what's interesting, I think, about and why I chose to write I Am Billy the Kid the way that I did is that it's the question of who gets to tell that story, and how it gets told, and how it gets remembered. Because I certainly know that I experience my life in one way and think of it in one way. But if I'm fortunate enough that anybody remembers me after I'm gone, they're going to be remembering quite a different story. And I find that interesting. That there's that old concept of you write one novel and you have one reader, and so now you've got two novels. And if you're lucky enough to have, say, 10,000 readers, then you've got 10,000 different novels, because everybody experiences it in a different way. I don't seem to be able to write a novel without playing with the whole idea of writing a story within the text, and making that to varying degrees evident to the reader as they go. Hopefully, in a way that doesn't get in the way, in a way that adds to the narrative. My Billy the Kid is not the historical Billy the Kid. Mine has definitely an awareness of self and others that it's hard to imagine that the historical Billy the Kid would have had. However, we have no way of knowing how he would have perceived his own life.
Now, I have a question about, because you mentioned obviously it's a revisionist history, this current book, and so I was kind of wondering, in today's political climate, are there more challenges now in telling a story about the American West than there were 5, 10, or more years ago? And is there any concern that people will see this just as a Western and not pick it up because they think that it's maybe in the like an older style kind of Western American West sort of novel?
Well, two parts to that. In terms of the concern as to whether people are going to pick it up because they may perceive it as an old fashioned kind of Western, I always feel that, I can only write the book, and absolutely everything that happens after that is up to other people. And if I try to think that any of that is up to me, that's a fool's game. I certainly wouldn't have foreseen that one of my novels would be landing on the moon. I
Mm.
wouldn't have foreseen that they would be in anywhere near as successful as they've been. Um, but that's none of that is up to me. I just sit down in front of my computer and put the words on the screen, and everything else is up to people that are not me and that are not in that room at the time. So I think that's an important thing for a writer to keep in mind. But in terms of the challenges of writing a Western, and whether it's more I don't know if it's harder, but it's certainly more complex, or should be more complex than it's ever been. Really, absolutely. The West has always been a myth, and interestingly, it's one that we keep telling. And we keep telling it in different ways. I mean, if you look at Netflix right now, I won't mention the shows, but there's a number of shows that deal with the myth and the trope in new and different ways. Um, so whether you're thinking in literary terms or cinematic terms, it has always been a fabrication larger than it actually was. I mean, if you look at the history of the Old West itself, I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not interesting, but we have turned it into so much more than it was originally. A lot of the history of the actual Old West is somewhat shabby, Billy's included. And what we do is glorify it and turn it as generations go by, as decades go by. We change it, adapt it, and make it more suitable to the society that we're actually living in. And then there's the whole challenge of an author who is non-indigenous, as I am not, uh, attempting to write indigenous characters. And I realized early on in the writing of I Am Billy the Kid that in actual fact, Billy probably would not have had the opportunity to encounter many indigenous characters, and he doesn't encounter any in this book. And I felt somewhat fortunate just in the fact that my workload was reduced substantially by that fact. But in the sequel to my previous novel, Skin House, I have included two Indigenous characters, and going through the process of having sensitivity readers, and I've taken a course at UBC, and I've done a fair amount of research, and hopefully I'm being responsible in doing that. But to go back to your question, are there more challenges now? Absolutely, and absolutely there should be.
Yes, I agree. And it's kind of funny. I think of it in terms, I feel like my responsibility, having read the book, is to really put it out there too, to say this isn't something that just follows the old classic American Western, which, quite frankly, isn't always that enjoyable to
Hmm.
read because there are lots of things that are, they paint a picture that was clearly not accurate to the times, truthfully.
And not accurate, and in many instances just horrendous.
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. In fact, I was just out talking to someone recently because they were talking about, Lonesome Dove, and I said, "I saw the TV show when it came out a million years ago," and I said, "I always wanted to read the book, but now all these years later, I think, does it hold up?" Like, I don't even know if a great classic like that holds up over time, so I'll have to check it out and see if it does, so
Well, I could give you some advice on
okay, give me some
that.
advice. I would love some advice, go ahead.
Don't read the book.
Oh, okay, really?
Yeah, I got very yeah, it didn't go well for me. I made it all the way through to the end, and there's some
Wow.
very, very fine writing in it.
Yeah.
It's very engaging in many ways, but and it's not. I don't think, if I remember correctly, it's not a matter of political. It's not in terms of indigenous issues or anything like that. Although it may be, I can't remember exactly. But I just remember thinking, wow, wow, times have progressed in a good way.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that because I will not waste because I know it's a really long book, so I will not waste my time, truthfully. Okay. Now, in preparation for reading your book, I felt I had to go back and read a little bit about Billy the Kid because he is such an iconic figure in American history.
Hmm.
But I was like, I can't really remember who he is or what he did or anything. So I did a bit of research, and and so I do have a kind of I'm going to make it a two-part question. But number one, there is that whole sideline story that he didn't die and that Pat Garrett let him escape, helped him kind of escape.
Hmm.
And some people came forward and said they were Billy the Kid, or et cetera. So I'm kind of curious about how you feel about that sort of storyline. And also, if it were possible, would you want to meet Billy the Kid in person and know the true story of his life?
Well, I did a fair amount of research for this book, as I do for all my books. I'm writing a historical novel now that deals with Elvis Presley and John Glenn, the astronaut, and the bombing of Dresden in World War II. So there's a lot of research to be done. So I like to think that I'm pretty comprehensive in doing that. And I can tell you what you say is true about all of those concepts that Billy didn't actually die at the hands of Pat Garrett. But I can feel pretty confident in saying that he did. That none of the rest of those legends or myths are true in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that we have turned Billy the Kid into someone of great significance, when really my feeling is that he wasn't at all.
Mm-hmm.
You asked if I'd be interested in meeting him and knowing the true story of his life. Absolutely not.
Mm.
Um,
Oh.
there's a quote from there's an old Western movie that old people like myself are aware of, called "The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance," directed by John Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a line in it that says they're talking about what happened in the story of the movie, and they're talking to a newspaper publisher, and he says, "When the truth becomes legend, print the legend." I
Mm-hmm.
think that the legend of Billy the Kid is far more interesting than the individual ever would be. I mean, we're talking about a 20-year-old kid who
Yeah.
killed 8 people and then got killed himself. I mean, there's not a lot to that. What is rich about Billy the Kid is what successive generations have done with the meager facts of his life. Um, so no, I wouldn't mind meeting my version of Billy the Kid. I'd love to sit
Ooh.
down and have a drink with him. But the actual Billy, I don't think we'd get along very well. And I'll steal Flaubert's quote about Madame Bovary, and when he said, "Madame Bovary, c'est moi," I'd say, "Billy, c'est moi." And so I don't know if I really want to sit and have a drink with myself. I don't think I'd be that good company for myself.
Well, thank you for those. It was a surprising answer to me because I guess for me, I love nonfiction, so I always want to know the truth of things, and so I would
Hmm.
totally want I would want to meet him and find out. Again, I agree with you. He was an insignificant person, probably, but
Hmm.
I would still want to know that. But thanks for
Hmm.
that answer, though. That was a great answer.
Yeah. Although I think your Billy would be interesting because he is also
Yeah,
quite funny.
yeah.
And like you said, very self aware. And I think he realizes that he was an insignificant character.
He
That
very much
wasn't,
does.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I very much enjoyed writing that character, and just giving him that voice and saying, "Okay, buddy, here we are. Say what you want to say,"
Hmm.
and
Yes.
just running with that. So I'm glad that worked for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, you've hinted at it a little bit, but could you please tell us a little bit more about the upcoming NASA lunar mission and how your recent novel Skin House is involved?
I am just so fortunate and overwhelmed to be involved in any way in that project. I guess it's a fairly complex thing to try and fit into to a short amount of time, but I'll do the best that I can with that. It's a project called Writers on the Moon, which is spearheaded by Susan K. Quinn, who's she's a former rocket scientist and has worked with NASA and Astrobotic, which is one of the lead teams on this project. Um, and it's an effort to get some literature included on the next moon landing, which is scheduled for later this year. It'll be the first American landing on the moon since the Apollo missions, and I don't want people to be thinking that it's just a matter of getting some novels up to the moon. It is very much not that. It's a very significant historic and scientific event, which has a lot of scientific experiments going with it, including robotic moon rovers. If people remember the Apollo missions and the lunar rovers that were involved in that, these will be robotic, and they're kind of spearheading a new age of investigation of the moon and the potential for the moon and the potential for travel beyond the moon. Medical experiments as well, but along with all of that, which is crucially important, authors are sending books along as well. And as someone who was, I think, 10 years old when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, and I watched it in fuzzy black and white, as everyone did at that time, in a cabin on a lake with my parents, and then walked out on the dock of that cabin after watching Neil Armstrong take his first steps, and looked up in the sky at the moon in wonder and amazement. For me to be able to be involved in just a tiny way in re-experiencing that adventure, and to have something that I worked on for years, and my own writing, which is very important to me anyway, to be involved in that. I woke up one morning shortly after the house that I'm sitting in burned down. We've recently rebuilt our house. We had a house fire 2 years ago, and so I was living in my son's house when this all came about, because we had no house. And I found out online that I was, I think, one day too late to be involved in this project. And a writer by the name of Carolyn R. Parsons, a very fine writer from Newfoundland, contacted me the next day and said, "Mike, I've got stuff going to the moon, and I've got room for you to be a stowaway. Would you be interested in that?" And I was like,
Oh, wow.
"Oh, I think maybe I would be interested in that. Yes." And a lot has come after that. Actually, yesterday, Astrobotic in the States unveiled the actual lander that's going to land on the moon later this year in a press conference. And there's just so, I mean, I could keep talking for an hour about this, which I won't do. But I'm just so gobsmacked and honored and humbled to be involved in this in any way.
That's an amazing story. And especially, as you said, when you were a kid and you were kind of looking up at the moon in that moment, that must have just been, to be part of that whole process now is just, it's got to just be kind of like a dream come true, but a dream you never imagined, right?
A dream I never, well, I mean, I imagined it, but as a 10-year-old kid does, and the fact that,
Yeah.
I could be an astronaut, but you can't. Although it turns out maybe you can.
Yeah, Billy, or your book can. I think.
Yeah. It's I mean, I don't know. It's just the fact that obviously I can't go to the moon, but in a way, writing is the most important. Other than a few people in my life, writing is the most important thing in my life. It always has been. So for that to be going to the moon, it's a little humbling.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and I want to encourage everyone to definitely pick up this book. You will be it's just there's so much to it. There are just so many layers to it. There's so many things that you'll want to discuss with your friends, etc. So we want to encourage everyone to pick up this book. We really love it. And Tara, do you want to add anything here at the end?
Just that I really enjoyed it, Mike. I didn't think that I would enjoy a Billy the Kid book, because also I'm not a fan of Westerns, but I love Billy and I love Turner. I love Billy's brother, Joseph. Like the characters are very endearing.
Well, thank you.
And they just happen to be set in the West. Like it's just a great book.
Yeah, it's as you say, it's a story that happens to be set within that trope of the Old West. It could exist anywhere, really.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mike, so much. We really appreciate you chatting with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been really a privilege.
Thank you, Mike.